The town of Riverbend was the kind of place where nothing unusual ever happened. It was small, quiet, predictable. The streets were lined with old brick buildings, and most people had known each other for years. Children rode their bikes through the town square, shop owners greeted customers by name, and every Sunday morning the church bells echoed across the valley. In a town like that, secrets were rare. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. Right in the center of Riverbend stood a small shop with a wooden sign hanging above the door. Caleb's Butcher Shop. For more than 20 years, Caleb had been the town's most trusted butcher. Every morning before sunrise, the lights inside his shop would turn on. By the time the townspeople woke up, the display window was already filled with neatly cut steaks, ribs, and fresh sausages. People said Caleb worked harder than anyone else in town. And his meat was famous. Restaurants bought from him. Families depended on him. Even the local police station ordered their weekly supplies from Caleb. He was polite, quiet, and always greeted customers with the same calm smile. "Morning," he would say, wrapping meat carefully in brown paper. No one ever had a reason to doubt him. But there was one small detail that had always been strange. No one in Riverbend had ever seen where Caleb's meat actually came from. Most butchers bought animals from nearby farms. But Caleb never mentioned any farm. Whenever someone casually asked about it, he simply gave the same answer. Private supplier outside town. Then he would change the subject. And somehow, people stopped asking. Maybe it was because Riverbend was the kind of town where people trusted each other without question. Or maybe, they simply didn't want to know. But there was another strange thing about Caleb. He never allowed anyone inside the large freezer room at the back of the shop. Not customers. Not delivery workers. Not even the restaurant owners who bought hundreds of pounds of meat from him every month. Whenever someone walked too close to that door, Caleb would step in front of it politely. "Sorry," he'd say with a friendly smile. "Health regulations." And that was the end of it. For 20 years, no one questioned him. Until one stormy evening in October. The rain was falling heavily that night, and strong winds rattled the windows of the butcher shop. Inside, the lights flickered as thunder rolled across the sky. Caleb was working late, preparing orders for the next morning. And helping him that night was a teenage delivery boy named Ethan. Ethan had only started working there 2 weeks earlier. He thought the job was simple. Deliver packages. Clean the shop. Go home. But that night, everything changed. Because when the electricity suddenly went out, the shop was plunged into darkness. Caleb lit a small flashlight and turned toward Ethan. "Go to the freezer," he said calmly. "There's a package I need you to bring me." Ethan hesitated. He had never been allowed inside the freezer before. But Caleb simply pointed toward the door. "Don't worry," he said. "It's just meat." And as Ethan slowly opened the heavy freezer door, cold air rushed out into the dark shop. Rows of hanging meat began to sway gently. But deep inside the freezer, something was waiting. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. And Ethan was about to see it. The power outage had turned Caleb's butcher shop into a place that felt completely different from the warm, busy store Ethan knew during the day. Now it was silent. The only sound was the rain hammering against the windows and the distant rumble of thunder. Ethan stood in the narrow hallway behind the shop, holding the small flashlight Caleb had given him. The beam of light shook slightly in his hand as he faced the large metal freezer door at the end of the corridor. He had passed that door many times before. But he had never been allowed to open it. Caleb was very strict about that. Still, tonight was different. The owner himself had told him to go inside. Ethan slowly grabbed the handle and pulled the door open. A blast of freezing air rushed out, making him shiver instantly. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the room. Rows of large meat cuts hung from metal hooks, swaying slightly as the cold air moved through the space. The faint creaking of chains echoed in the freezer. For a moment, everything looked normal. Just meat. Lots of it. More than Ethan had ever seen in the shop before. "Find the package labeled Order 7, Caleb's voice called faintly from the hallway behind him. Ethan stepped deeper into the freezer. His shoes crunched softly on the frozen floor. He began scanning the packages stacked on metal shelves. Most were wrapped neatly in thick white paper with labels attached. But then he noticed something strange. One bundle sitting on the lower shelf looked different. The wrapping wasn't the same. Instead of white butcher paper, it was covered in old plastic and tied tightly with thick rope. Ethan frowned. "That's weird," he muttered quietly. He crouched down and pointed the flashlight at it. The plastic wrapping looked uneven, like whatever was inside had an unusual shape. Curiosity got the better of him. Ethan reached forward and pulled the bundle slightly closer. As he adjusted the flashlight, the beam of light revealed something that made his heart skip. From a small tear in the plastic, something pale was sticking out. At first, Ethan thought it was just a piece of bone. But when the light moved slightly, he realized it looked disturbingly familiar. Too familiar. His breath caught in his throat. It looked like a human finger. Ethan instantly dropped the package and stumbled backward, his flashlight slipping from his hand and rolling across the floor. The beam spun wildly across the freezer walls. Hanging meat. Metal hooks. Cold mist in the air. Then the light stopped, pointing directly at the torn plastic bundle again. Ethan's chest was pounding now. "No, no way," he whispered. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe it wasn't what he thought. Slowly, trembling, he stepped forward again. He leaned closer to the bundle. Closer. And just as he was about to touch the plastic again, a voice suddenly spoke behind him. Very calm. Very quiet. "You weren't supposed to see that." Ethan froze. The cold air in the freezer suddenly felt much heavier. Slowly. Very slowly. He turned around. Standing in the doorway was Caleb. The flashlight from the hallway cast a shadow across half of his face. But the smile Ethan had always seen in the shop was gone. And in his hand, Caleb was holding a long butcher knife. The next morning in Riverbend began just like any other. The sun rose slowly over the quiet streets. Shop owners unlocked their doors, delivery trucks rolled through the town square, and the smell of fresh bread drifted out of the bakery on the corner. To everyone else, it was just another normal day. But one person in town never woke up for work. Ethan. At first, no one thought much about it. Teenagers skipped shifts all the time. Maybe he overslept. Maybe he decided the job wasn't worth it. When Caleb opened his butcher shop that morning, customers lined up outside as usual. Inside, Caleb walked calmly behind the counter, slicing meat with steady hands. If anything, he looked even more relaxed than usual. "Where's that new delivery boy?" one of the restaurant owners asked casually. Caleb didn't even look up. "Didn't show up today," he replied simply. "Kids these days," the man laughed. And that was the end of the conversation. But by evening, someone began to worry. Ethan's mother. She had called his phone 6 times. No answer. She checked his room. His backpack was still there. His clothes were still there. And his bicycle was missing. At first she thought he might be out with friends. But when night came and Ethan still hadn't returned, a quiet fear began creeping into her chest. The next morning, she went to the Riverbend police station. Officer Daniels listened carefully as she explained everything. "When was the last time you saw him?" he asked. "Yesterday afternoon," she said nervously. "He said he had a late shift at Caleb's butcher shop." That afternoon, Officer Daniels walked across the town square and entered the shop. The bell above the door rang softly. Caleb looked up from behind the counter and smiled politely. "Afternoon, officer." Daniels nodded. "Just a quick question. That delivery boy of yours, Ethan, when did he leave last night?" Caleb wiped his hands slowly on a cloth. "He finished cleaning and left around 9, he said calmly. Everything seemed normal." "Did he say where he was going?" Daniels asked. Caleb shook his head. Teenagers don't usually tell their bosses where they go. The officer studied Caleb for a moment. But nothing about the butcher seemed suspicious. The shop was spotless. The display case was full. Everything looked completely ordinary. So Daniels simply nodded and left. But over the next few days, something strange began happening in Riverbend. Rumors started spreading. People whispered about Ethan disappearing. Some said he had run away. Others believed he might have left town with friends. But there was one detail that made a few people uncomfortable. After Ethan vanished, Caleb's shop suddenly had more meat than ever before. The freezer was always full. New cuts appeared in the display window every morning. And strangely, business started booming. Restaurants placed larger orders. Customers said the meat tasted even better than usual. No one could explain it. But every evening when the shop closed, the light in Caleb's freezer room stayed on late into the night. And sometimes, people walking past the alley behind the butcher shop claimed they heard strange noises coming from inside. Metal chains moving. Heavy objects dragging across the floor. But whenever someone looked through the back window, all they saw was Caleb, walking alone, smiling quietly to himself. And in a small town like Riverbend, people preferred not to ask too many questions. Even when someone had disappeared without a trace. 3 days after Ethan disappeared, Riverbend slowly returned to its normal routine. At least on the surface. People still talked about the missing boy, of course. Small towns always did. Conversations about Ethan floated through the grocery store, the gas station, and the cafe on Main Street. But without any real clues, the rumors slowly faded. And life moved on. Meanwhile, Caleb's butcher shop was busier than ever. The display window was filled with fresh cuts every morning. Thick steaks, sausages, ribs, perfectly arranged behind the glass. Customers kept coming back. Many of them even said the same strange thing. The meat tastes better lately. One of Caleb's biggest customers was a restaurant owner named Marcus Hill. Marcus ran a popular diner called the Riverbend Grill. For nearly 10 years, he had bought all his meat from Caleb. So when business started booming, Marcus placed even larger orders. That Friday evening, the diner was packed. The smell of grilled steaks filled the air while customers laughed and talked over their meals. Marcus stood behind the counter watching proudly. Then suddenly, a customer raised his hand. "Hey, Marcus." Marcus walked over. "Yes sir, everything okay?" The man looked down at his plate with a confused expression. "This steak tastes a little different." Marcus frowned. "Different? How so?" The man shrugged. "I don't know, it's not bad. Actually, it's really good. Just unusual. Marcus forced a small smile. Well, maybe the seasoning tonight. But the comment stayed in his mind. Later, after the dinner rush ended, Marcus went into the kitchen. He cut a small piece of the same meat and tasted it. Immediately he paused. The customer was right. It wasn't spoiled. It wasn't bad. But something about the flavor was unfamiliar. Strange. Marcus had cooked thousands of steaks in his life. He knew exactly how beef, pork, and lamb were supposed to taste. And this didn't quite match any of them. That night, Marcus decided to stop by Caleb's shop before heading home. The lights inside were still on. Caleb was cleaning his cutting table when Marcus entered. The bell above the door rang. Caleb looked up and smiled politely. Marcus. Need another order already? Marcus laughed lightly. Not exactly. He walked closer to the counter. Just wanted to ask something. Caleb folded his cloth slowly. What is it? Marcus hesitated. This new batch of meat, where did you get it? For a moment, Caleb said nothing. Then he smiled again. New supplier. Marcus crossed his arms. Local farm. Caleb shook his head calmly. Private. The same answer he always gave. Marcus nodded slowly, pretending to accept it. But as he walked out of the shop, something caught his attention behind the building. A large delivery truck was parked in the alley. Marcus had never seen it before. The truck was old and rusty. There was no farm logo on the side. No company name. Just plain metal covered in dried mud. Marcus stepped closer, curious. Then he noticed something that made his stomach tighten. Near the back door of the truck, there was a long dark stain trailing down toward the ground. Marcus stared at it for a few seconds. Rainwater was slowly washing it away. But something about it didn't feel right. And for the first time since he had known Caleb, Marcus felt a quiet, uncomfortable thought enter his mind. Where exactly was Caleb getting his meat from? That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. The image of the rusty truck behind Caleb's shop kept replaying in his mind. For years he had trusted Caleb without question. Everyone in Riverbend had. But now, something about the butcher felt wrong. By midnight, Marcus finally gave up trying to sleep. He grabbed his jacket and drove back into town. The streets were empty. Rain from earlier had left the pavement shining under the dim streetlights. Caleb's butcher shop was dark. Closed. Marcus parked across the street and waited for a moment, staring at the building. Part of him felt ridiculous. But another part of him couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling growing in his chest. Finally, he stepped out of the car and quietly walked toward the shop. The back alley was silent. The rusty truck was gone. Marcus approached the back door slowly. To his surprise, it wasn't locked. He pushed it open carefully and stepped inside. The shop smelled cold and metallic in the darkness. Marcus turned on the flashlight from his phone and began walking through the room. Everything looked normal. Clean counters. Empty cutting boards. The large freezer door stood closed at the end of the hallway. Marcus moved toward it. But before he reached it, something else caught his attention. A metal door on the side wall. Marcus had been inside this shop dozens of times before. He had never seen that door. It was thick, industrial, and secured with heavy chains and a large lock. Marcus slowly stepped closer. And then he heard it. A faint sound coming from the other side. A soft noise. Almost like someone crying. Marcus felt his heart begin to pound. He stood frozen in front of the chain metal door, trying to convince himself that he had imagined the sound. But then he heard it again. A weak, muffled noise. Like someone struggling to breathe or whispering for help. Marcus's stomach tightened. "Hello," he called quietly. No response. He moved closer and pressed his ear against the cold metal surface. For a moment there was only silence. Then suddenly, a faint movement inside. Marcus jumped back in shock. Someone was definitely behind that door. His mind raced. Who could it be? Why would Caleb lock someone in his shop? Marcus quickly looked around the room, searching for something to break the chain. But before he could take another step, the lights in the butcher shop suddenly flicked on. Marcus spun around. Standing in the hallway behind him was Caleb. His expression was completely calm. Too calm. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Caleb slowly walked forward, his footsteps echoing softly across the tiled floor. "I was wondering," Caleb said quietly, "when someone would finally get curious enough to come back here." Marcus felt his throat go dry. "What's behind that door?" he demanded. Caleb stopped a few feet away. For a moment, he simply stared at Marcus. Then he smiled. Not the friendly smile customers saw every day. This one was colder. Darker. Caleb reached into his pocket and slowly pulled out a small key. He walked past Marcus toward the chain door. "You really want to know?" he asked calmly. The metal chains rattled as he unlocked them. Marcus's pulse raced as the heavy lock dropped to the floor. Slowly, Caleb pulled the door open. And the dark room behind it was finally revealed. The metal door creaked loudly as Caleb pulled it open. A cold, damp smell drifted out of the dark space beyond it. Marcus slowly stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside was a narrow staircase leading downward. The concrete steps disappeared into darkness. For a moment, Marcus hesitated. Then Caleb switched on another light. A weak yellow bulb flickered somewhere below, revealing what was hidden beneath the butcher shop. Marcus looked down the stairs. And what he saw made his blood run cold. The basement was small and windowless. Metal cages lined the walls. Chains hung from hooks in the ceiling. And scattered across the floor were objects that clearly didn't belong in a butcher shop. Wallets. Phones. Shoes. Bags. Personal belongings. Dozens of them. Marcus felt a wave of horror wash over him. "Caleb," he whispered. "What is this place?" Caleb stepped down the first stair slowly. His face was completely emotionless. "For years," he said quietly, "people have been passing through Riverbend. Travelers. Hitchhikers. People no one would miss right away." Marcus's breathing became heavier. "You're lying," he said, shaking his head. But deep down, he already knew the truth. Caleb turned and looked back at him. "You asked where the meat comes from," he said calmly. Marcus felt his stomach twist. "No." Caleb's voice was almost casual. "Animals are expensive," he continued. "But people." He paused. Then finished the sentence in a quiet voice. "People are everywhere." Marcus stumbled backward in horror. Suddenly, the strange taste of the steaks. The missing delivery boy. The full freezer. It all made sense. And that's when Marcus realized something even worse. He wasn't discovering the truth. He was standing inside the place where the truth disappeared. Marcus's mind raced as he backed away from the basement stairs. Everything suddenly made horrifying sense. The strange taste of the meat. Ethan's disappearance. The freezer that was always full. Marcus looked at Caleb with pure disbelief. "You're insane," he whispered. Caleb didn't react. He simply stood there calmly, watching Marcus the way a hunter watches trapped prey. "You don't understand," Caleb said quietly. "For years I've been feeding this town." Marcus shook his head, panic rising in his chest. "Feeding them what?" he shouted. Caleb's expression didn't change. But his eyes grew colder. "Something they clearly enjoy." Marcus felt sick. The customers at his restaurant. Families across Riverbend. Even the police officers who bought meat every week. They had all trusted Caleb. None of them knew the truth. Marcus slowly turned toward the back door, realizing he needed to get out of the shop. To tell someone. Anyone. But Caleb stepped forward, blocking his path. "You shouldn't have come here tonight," Caleb said softly. Marcus's heart pounded. Outside, the wind howled through the empty streets of Riverbend. No one could hear what was happening inside the butcher shop. Marcus suddenly understood something terrifying. The town had trusted Caleb for 20 years. No one would suspect him now. And if Marcus disappeared, people would probably believe the same thing they believed about Ethan. That he had simply left town. Marcus looked toward the door again. Then back at Caleb. For a brief moment, the room was completely silent. Then Caleb slowly reached for the knife on the nearby cutting table. And Marcus realized one final, horrifying truth. In Riverbend, people had been enjoying Caleb's meat for decades. But the real secret wasn't what Caleb was doing. The real secret was this. By the time anyone discovered the truth, the entire town had already eaten the evidence. 3 months later, Riverbend looked completely normal again. The butcher shop was closed. Caleb had disappeared without a trace. Police searched the building for weeks but found almost nothing. No bodies. No clear evidence. Just the strange basement and the personal belongings hidden inside the walls. Marcus was the only one who knew the full truth. But even he struggled to explain it. Because whenever investigators asked the most important question, "Where are the victims?" there was no answer. Eventually, the case grew cold. Caleb's shop was abandoned. People stopped talking about it. Life moved on. Until one day, a small town nearly 200 miles away opened a brand new butcher shop. The owner was quiet, polite, friendly with customers. The sign outside the store read, "Fresh farm meats." And the man behind the counter greeted every customer with the same calm smile. A smile that looked very familiar. Because his name was Caleb. And once again, no one asked where the meat came from. If this story is already giving you chills, take a second to like the video, it really helps the channel. And if you think Marcus should have left the shop right there, drop a like on this video.